The morning mist clung to the fields like a ghostly veil, its damp chill soaked into the hem of my patched skirt. Grain clattered in the old bucket as I picked my way through the field toward the sheep pen. I can easily hold the bucket with one arm now without dragging it. Father says it's because I'm getting stronger now that I've seen my 12th summer. I peered inside and looked at the bucket's meager contents. I'm not so sure strength has anything to do with it. The claw marks on the fence are deeper today. Splinters of wood lay scattered across the frost, broken bone. A shadow rip had tested its strength last night. They are getting more desperate coming this close to people. Their hollow growling cries at night are starting to sound like they are just outside the farmhouse. The sheep huddled together in the corner of the pen, away from the damaged fence. They bleated nervously as I poured grain into their trough. It's okay, girls. I'm here now. I waited with the sheep until their nervous bleating was replaced with a patter of shuffling hooves towards the trough. In the pale light, it looked like little clouds against the dark gloom of the primeval forest. East, beyond the fields, towering trees loomed, their ancient roots twisting outward as if seeking to claim the farm. The forest shadow always feels alive, crawling inch by inch towards the farmstead. The farm's storehouse stood behind me, its stone foundation laid by my grandfather's grandfather. Back when the forest was still a day's walk from here, now it lurked less than a bowshot away. A wall of ancient bark and deeper shadows that seemed to grow taller with each passing season. I lingered in the pen, my gaze shifting southward now. Every morning, my eyes were drawn like a lodestone to the distant hills, speckled with ruins. Tangles of spires and broken stones, swallowed by time and nature. The bygone ruins. I've never been closer to them than the southern edge of this farm, yet every night I feel the rough stone beneath my fingers. I trace strange carvings and discover hidden treasures and lost knowledge, buried in their shadows. I am not going to spend my whole life mending fences and scattering grain. The sound of boots on gravel pulled me back. I turned and saw them. 3 figures standing in the courtyard. My father was in the middle, his shoulders stiff. The others were cloaked in dark fabric, weapons visible at their sides. I didn't need to see the spiral crest to know who they were and what they wanted. The remnants. Their stern faces and gloved hands carried the weight of unspoken threats. Their weapons, a reminder of their power. They claimed to protect what was left of humanity, offering unity in this fractured world. But our farm had long traded with Nemeton as well, the old god of this world, who had long sought to transform the world into the world of legend. They came here often enough, always demanding something, more grain, more wool, more meat, or worse, our loyalty. Father wouldn't give them that no matter how much pressure they put on him. The farm survived because we trade with everyone, he always said. We are not fighters. We don't choose sides. But lately, it seemed like everyone wanted us to. One of the remnants, a tall woman with a large blade strapped across her back, leaned in close to Father. She spoke with a sharp voice, though I couldn't make out the words from here. She towered over Father. Her movements looked deliberate, but Father stood his ground, though I could see the tension in the way his hand curled at his side. A figure broke away from the other remnants waiting at the edge of our farm and started toward me. A man, younger than the rest. He had a kind face, tired but warm. He walked toward me slowly, hands up, empty. "Hello," he said as he crouched to my level. "What's your name?" His voice was soft as he asked. "Ira," I replied, clutching my bucket tightly. "Well, Ira, you look like somebody who knows this farm better than anyone. Have you seen anything strange around the farm lately? His voice was almost musical, and his eyes were so blue. They almost looked like they were glowing. Maybe some people you don't know? I shook my head. I noticed you seemed quite captivated by the ruins to the south. I haven't been to those ruins yet, but I've been to some north of here. Want to see something ancient? I felt my mouth drop and heard my pocket clatter to the ground. He took a small, smooth, storm grey stone from a pouch on his belt and held it up for me. Do you know what this is? He asked. Without taking my eyes from the stone, I managed to slightly shake my head. This is a rune stone. His voice lingered on the word rune as he pressed the stone into my hand. I could feel my fingers, my palm, and then my whole hand faintly tingle as I held the stone. Feel those markings on the stone's surface. Those are bygone runes, though I carved them myself. They let me tell the stone what to do. I could faintly feel patterns and grooves with my fingers, but the stone's surface appeared unblemished to my eyes. Feel this one? He asked, as he guided my fingers over some wavy lines. This one controls fire. My breath caught. Fire? You can make fire with a stone? He smiled. I could show you, but your father might not like that very much. Fire and farms don't tend to mix well. My father's voice, louder now, cut through the moment. I glanced past the man to see my father gesturing sharply at the remnant woman. His voice was firm, but his hand was still curled. We'll leave soon, the man said, still watching me. Don't worry, we are not here to hurt anyone. I passed the stone back to him. I didn't believe him, not completely. The howling came again that night, louder and closer than ever before. I was the last one in the farmhouse still awake when it started. Sitting by the window staring at the ruins in the distance, my whole body froze as the low growl carried across the fields. They were too close. Howls, growls, snarls, and snaps echoed through my mind as I trembled by the window. Then there was another sound, a cry of pain, a very human cry. Before I knew what was happening, my legs were moving on their own, and I was on the steps outside the farmhouse. The cold air bit at my skin, and the hard frosted ground scratched my bare feet, but I barely noticed the pain. I felt the familiar weight of my bucket and looked down to see that I was holding it. My body felt like I could lift the bucket with one finger right now. I gripped the bucket tighter. It felt good to hold something solid. The sheep pen was chaos, wool and hooves scattering to all corners as a dozen shadows snarled and snapped. One whole side of the fence was shattered. I tried to open the gate just a little bit so the sheep could escape into the field, but as soon as I unlatched the gate, the sheep barreled into it. The gate hit me hard. I felt the breath leave my chest as it threw me back, tumbling into the frozen mud. Ira! My face is so cold. Why am I outside? Why am I so cold? Ira! The sheep gate is open. It shouldn't be open. Ira! I should close it, or else the sheep might escape. Ira, get back! My father shouted, his voice cutting through the fog in my mind. I tried to push myself up, but my left arm hung limp, useless at my side. It wasn't sitting right, and it hurt when I tried to move it. Before I knew what was happening, something heavy pressed down on my chest, an immense weight that continued to get heavier and heavier. I let out a faint, failing scream as the air was once again forced out of my chest. Foul, hot breath and saliva oozed over my face. I looked up and saw fur and fangs obscured by swirling shadows. The shadow opened, revealing a mouth, and its teeth were covered in fresh blood. I had no air left to scream. Shadows were in front of me, and darkness crept in at the corner of my vision. With what felt like all of my remaining strength, I swung wildly with my right arm at the shadow. My grain bucket shattered as it crashed into the creature's head. The impact staggered it, but only a few steps. But it was enough for me to let out a haggard breath. "Help!" I managed to gasp a single word out. The remnants were faster than I expected. A large silver blade drove deep into the shadow ripper next to me. I looked up to see the tall remnant woman standing over me. She barked orders to her soldiers. All around me I could see silvery blades flashing as they clashed against the shadows. I caught a glimpse of the younger man from earlier. His runestone glowed bright blue in his hand as he faced 3 large shadow rippers. Flames erupted in the darkness. For a moment, the whole farm was illuminated as flames danced in front of the man. It was almost beautiful. When it was over, the night felt heavy. The pen and fields were littered with the bodies of sheep and shadow rippers. One of my father's farmhands lay still by the fence, his body crumpled like a broken doll. My father kneeled beside him, head bowed. The primeval forest had always been there, a distant shadow, but tonight it had reached us, with teeth and claws and hunger. I was silent as the young man used his cloak to tie a makeshift sling for my arm. His face was somber as he worked. "You are very brave," he said quietly, "but this place, it's no longer safe. Please try to convince your father. This farm will not be safe without a permanent remnant garrison." I didn't reply right away. My eyes were on the ruins again, their shadows sharper now as the faint morning light began to silhouette them. They felt closer somehow. Not just a dream anymore, but a promise. "Thank you," I whispered. My voice was still raspy, and my breathing was painful. He nodded and stood. When we returned to our camp, our druids will want to come here and investigate this for themselves. He gestured toward the primeval forest. Its roots, its shadows, were noticeably closer than when the remnants had arrived. "I will ask the druids to check in on you. They should be able to speed your recovery." With that, he joined the trail of wounded and exhausted soldiers making their way along the northern road. Someday, I thought. Someday I'll leave too. But not today. Today I'm just a farm girl standing on the edge of the wild. I don't think I've quite figured out this game review as a short story format, but I do intend to make more and continue to tweak and refine the format and style. So if you've enjoyed this and you want more stories from gaming's countless worlds, feel free to join me on this journey by subscribing. And please give me comments and feedback, as it really will help me refine this format.
So let's talk about Drova as final thoughts. When I bought Drova, I bought it completely blind. I hadn't heard of it. It just popped up on Steam and caught my eye. I really had no idea it would become the best game I played in 2024. And I think what makes the game so special is more what it doesn't do than what it does do. It takes a lot of influence from Gothic in the best possible ways. It gets that it doesn't need to explain every little detail of the world to make it feel real. Instead of throwing a bunch of exposition at you, it lets you discover things for yourself. You learn about the world by experiencing it, not by having a history lesson just thrown at you. There's also a really clever thing they did with the look mechanic. You hold right click to slow down and take in your surroundings. This sounds pretty simple, but it changes a lot of the way you view and interact with the world. Instead of just sprinting to quest markers and checkpoints, like a lot of modern games send you on your way, you actually end up paying a lot more attention to your environment and finding a lot of hidden paths and secrets along the way. This is a fairly simple mechanic, but it's really engaging. Now, the story itself is not that complex and the characters aren't deep, but there are moments in the game that really do hit you, and they make you stop and just kind of reflect on the impact you're having in the world as a character, more so than a lot of games that are more often regarded for their story, at least for me. The combat is nothing completely outstanding. It's not reinventing the wheel. You're pretty much just looking at your regular block, dodge, and attack with a handful of weapons. But it is very well executed, it's fluid, responsive, and it works. Building your character or your character building options are following the same kind of pattern as combat. It seems fairly simple at first, but it does get more interesting as you start to get different magic items that can change how you're playing, mix and match these together with the different passive skills, and you can create fairly interesting builds. I think ultimately what it comes down to with Drova is it's really not trying to be a revolution in gaming. It's just taking what worked in classic games like Gothic and polishing it to a mirror shine. It's kind of proof that you don't need to reinvent the wheel to make something special. You just need to do a few things really well, and that's going to come out much better than trying to do everything all at once. And for anyone interested in kind of the nitty-gritty of my playthrough, I put about 45 hours into Drova on PC. I tried to 100% it as much as I could on my first playthrough. I did a Nemeton run on Iron mode, and I played a crit bleed dagger build.